It began quietly, with a single announcement buried deep in an economic press release that most people ignored. A new tariff. Just a percentage, just a number. But numbers, when applied to nations, can shake the world. On one side stood the United States, the world's largest economy, confident, aggressive, and deeply protective of its industries. On the other side stood India, rising fast, ambitious, and determined to protect its domestic producers and global ambitions. This was not a war of soldiers or missiles. This was a war of spreadsheets, ports, factories, and livelihoods. The first blow came when the U.S. increased tariffs on select Indian exports, citing trade imbalance and market access issues. Overnight, Indian manufacturers saw their products become more expensive on American shelves. Orders slowed, containers waited longer at ports, phones in export offices rang less often. In Washington, officials framed the move as fair trade enforcement, a message aimed straight at domestic voters. But in New Delhi, the message sounded very different. A warning, maybe even a challenge. India responded, not with words, but with tariffs of its own on American goods. Almonds, apples, motorcycles, and high-profile U.S. products suddenly faced higher costs entering the Indian market. American farmers felt it first, watching exports dip while warehouses filled. News anchors began using a phrase that had haunted global markets before: tariff war. Stock markets reacted nervously because investors understand something politicians rarely admit. Trade wars rarely have winners. Behind the scenes, diplomats worked overtime, trying to prevent escalation without appearing weak. Each country accused the other of unfair practices, hidden subsidies, and broken promises. Social media exploded, with nationalism rising on both sides, fueled by selective facts and emotional headlines. In India, the narrative became one of self-reliance and economic sovereignty. In the U.S., it became about protecting jobs and standing tough against competitors. Multinational companies found themselves caught in the middle, unsure where to invest next. Supply chains that took decades to build suddenly looked fragile. A smartphone assembled in one country using parts from 3 others became a symbol of how interconnected the world had become. Economists warned that prolonged tariffs could slow growth in both nations. But warnings rarely trend, while conflict always does. As negotiations stalled, tariffs expanded to new product categories. Small businesses suffered the most. Companies with no lobbyists, no safety nets, and no alternative markets. Consumers, too, began to feel the pinch as prices slowly crept upward. A shirt, a phone, a medical device, everything now carried the hidden cost of politics. Yet neither side wanted to blink first, because in global trade, perception is power. Headlines frame the conflict as a test of dominance between an established superpower and an emerging giant. But on factory floors and farms, the battle felt far more personal. Workers worried about layoffs. Exporters worried about survival. The world watched closely, knowing this dispute could reshape global trade alliances. Other nations began quietly adjusting strategies, sensing opportunity amid tension. Talks resumed, collapsed, and resumed again, each time surrounded by optimism and skepticism. Analysts debated whether this was strategy, pressure tactics, or the start of a long-term shift. One truth became clear: tariffs were no longer just economic tools, they were weapons. Weapons that could influence elections, reshape industries, and alter diplomatic relationships. Eventually, compromise began to look more appealing than confrontation. Behind closed doors, both sides calculated the true cost of pride, because every extra month of tariffs meant lost growth, lost trust, and lost opportunity. The tariff war did not end with a dramatic victory. It faded into negotiations, adjustments, and quiet rollbacks. But its impact lingered, leaving lessons written into policy papers and boardrooms. The world was reminded that globalization is powerful, but fragile. that cooperation builds faster than conflict, but conflict spreads faster than cooperation. The USA versus India tariff war was never just about trade. It was about power, pride, and the future of a connected world. And the next chapter of that story is still being written by decisions made today.